Hey everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. Today I'm going to be doing kind of a follow-up or a continuation of my review on the Behringer ADA8200. There's one thing in the review that I just got completely wrong, and I'd like to correct that for posterity's sake. And also it's in response to a couple of the user comments that I got on that video. There was a really exciting feature that I wanted to try out to see if I could get it to work. In the comments to that video, Recording Studio 9 had made the comment that by connecting another ADAT cable, having one both to the digital out and the digital in, that I would be able to use the analog ins on the front, send those to my interface, and the analog outputs on the back, and be able to send those to my interface. And for me, that's a really exciting possibility, because while my interface here has 8 analog inputs and 8 analog outputs, you know, 2 of those analog outputs are the main speaker outputs. Another 2 are the headphone outputs, and that really only leaves 4 analog outputs. And when I'm trying to loop in outward gear and trying to get you know, send line level signals to my compressors and things like that, I end up getting in situations where I can only do a couple at a time, and I have to take turns using the same analog outputs. I like being able to have the analog inputs here for recording drums, so I could have you know, 8 and 9 and 10, however many microphones all recording at the same time. But this will be really cool if I can actually get 8 outputs out of this thing as well, and use them in conjunction with the analog outputs on my interface here. So, and also there was a comment by Jan Anderson who had wanted some detail about how I actually hook these things up here. So I figure I can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I can try out Recording Studio 9's suggestion to see if I can get ins and outs out of this. And Jant's suggestion to give a little bit more detail on how everything plugs in to each other and how I get it set up in the software. Also, the main thing that I got wrong in that review was the way that I thought that it worked was if you plugged a microphone into the front panel here, that it ended up essentially passing that signal through to the analog outputs on the back. And I'd made the suggestion that you could pair this with an audio interface that maybe if it doesn't have ADAT connectivity, digital connectivity, that you could just use the analog outs as basically just a pass-through from the front panel through the back panel and into analog inputs on your interface. That's just wrong. It doesn't work that way at all. So sorry, I hope I didn't mislead anybody too badly there. And I'll see if I can put an annotation or something, you know, maybe a comment on that other video to let everybody know that, yeah, no, I was just wrong. It happens. So let me get the camera moved in closer here, get things repositioned, and let's plug this thing in and see what we can do. Okay, I got the camera kind of pulled in a little closer here. So let's take a look at, on my interface, this is the RME Fireface UCX. I painstakingly removed it from my rack, took the rack ears off. Let's take a look at the back panel here. And you know, this thing is just chock full of connectivity, so you can imagine how many things I have plugged into it. So that's the reason it took me so long to get around to doing this demonstration, because, man, it's really a pain to get all that disconnected and reconnected, but it was something I needed to do because last time I rearranged everything in my studio, I had to change some of the cables that I was using, and I didn't label the cables, so this was a good opportunity to put some labels on all the cables, so they shouldn't be that difficult to get everything back where it belongs. But the connectivity that we are most interested in here are these 2 little guys right here. These are the ADAT light pipe input and output, and then also the word clock, and that's these 2 coaxial connectors here, these kind of big things that protrude. One is an input and one is an output. So this is the input, this is the output. In my case, I am going to use the RME as the source for the word clock. Now, Recording Studio 9 had made the comment also that that the ultra gain can do word clock sync over an ADAT, but I don't know how to get this to do that. So I'm going to continue to use that coaxial cable for the word clock sync between the two devices. All right, so on the ADA8200, you have some very familiar looking connectivity here on the back. Let's see if I can get it in nice and close here. But the same thing. So we've got this ADAT in and out, and then we have that same kind of protruding coaxial word clock connection. Okay, so since I'm going to have this one be the slave, and this one be the master, so that tells me how I'm going to set this little slider here. So there are 4 different positions. So if this one is going to be the slave, which it is, I have the choice here of telling it where the sync is going to come from. Is it going to come from the word clock in, or is it going to come over ADAT? And in my case, it's going to come from the word clock in, so I'm just going to put this slider all the way this way here, which tells it you're in slave mode, get your sync from the word clock input. Now, if I were going to use this as the master clock and this as the slave, I would have 2 different choices. I would flick it over here to this setting, and basically I would set from here what my sample rate is going to be. Is it going to be 44.1 or is it going to be 48 kilohertz? But since this is going to be in slave mode, it's going to be told that by this. So, okay, so what we're going to need to actually get them plugged in. Pretty similar to my last time I reviewed this, except for one more cable this time. Okay. Some familiar looking cables here. So this time I have 2 of the Toslink optical cables. And I have that, what was it, the Bnc cable? And this is going to be my word clock connection between the 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug things in. Now, it's going to be just kind of a crisscross here. So this unit has digital input and output. This has digital input and output. You're going to plug an in to an out and an in to an out. All right, so it's kind of a crisscross. So let's go ahead and plug those in. So I'm going to plug the digital out of here. Gotta plug these in. Whoops. Plug these in the right direction. Okay, so the out of here will go to the in of the interface. I'm not very good at getting these in the right direction. Okay, they have a nice gratifying click when the cable goes all the way in, so you know it's all the way in. Okay, now let's do the other one. So the input on the ADA will go to the output of the interface, and a nice click. Okay, and now with the Bnc cable, it's not a directional cable or anything, so we'll put this in here. We give it the end a little twist to kind of lock it in place. All right, and since this is going to be my word clock source, I want to make sure that this is going from the word clock out of here. All right, there we go. It's got that nice little twisty end there. Okay. All right, so I got kind of a tangle of cables here. It's a little ugly. Let's see if I can get a couple out of the way. Okay. All right, so now I've got this guy plugged in, got power supplied to him and everything. So on the front, I'll go ahead and give it some power, and hopefully, let me turn around and look here. Yes, the sync light here says locked, and that's good. That means that he's locked in with the interface. And then on my interface, he has an LED indicator on the front, a little green light, which you may or may not be able to see very well, but over here, and that's the ADAT light, and that means that yes, he's synced up, he has ADAT connectivity, he's synced, he's locked. That means that these two are talking to each other. So let's go into Reaper and let's see what the inputs and outputs look like. So let's see if we can get input and output at the same time from here. Okay, over on the software side, let's take a look at the settings that I've got here. Okay, so in my Fireface's settings program here, I am going to set this to internal because I had used my Fireface as the master clock source. Now, had I used the ADA8200 as the master and slaved my interface to that, I would have chosen one of these other options here. So SPDIF coax, that's not a connection that I've made here. The optical in, now I guess that's probably what Recording Studio 9 was probably talking about. If I had the 8200 as the master and set the slider switch to ADAT as the clock, then I could probably set my interface to accept that over the optical in. Otherwise, if I have it hooked up like I have it now, where I have that word input, where I have the Bnc cable, that coaxial cable, I could use that. But instead, I'm using internal here because I'm using my interface as the master clock source. But I can see, okay, here I've got ADAT sync, and it's synced at 48 kilohertz, which is the sample rate that I'm recording at. I've got my sample rate set right here, clock source internal, and it's all synced up. So that's about all there is to the software setup. Now, depending on what interface you're using, this could be very different looking for your interface's setup. The settings are going to be pretty similar. The options are going to be pretty similar. Just might look different. Okay, so we've got Reaper fired up here. Let's just create a new track. And let's take a look at what all inputs it allows now. Oh, actually one thing you'll have to do to enable, make sure that you can see all the inputs and outputs is go to Options, go to Preferences, and go to Audio, Device. Oh, and of course I'm recording in the background right now, so anyways, in this window, it'll allow you to set the first and last input and the first and last output, and that way you can select from all the inputs or outputs between those. So in my case, I had to make sure that analog 1 is the first input and ADAT8 is the last input. Same for the outputs. Analog 1 is the first output and ADAT8 is the last output. So just make sure to go ahead and set those. You know, I'm in the middle of recording here, so I can't really do that. Okay, I'll cancel out of there. Yeah, let's take a look at what all we got. So let's look at what all inputs we have. So for mono inputs, I've got my analog 1 through 8, and I have my ADAT. Well, and it labels these ADATs a little strangely because on this interface, you could get them from either SPDIF or ADAT. So ADAT 1, ADAT 2, ADAT 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's awesome. Okay, now let's look at outputs. And let's see, a way to do that in Reaper. Let's bring the mixer window over and let's click on one of these sends, like a track send. Okay, so let's go to audio hardware outputs. And if I click on this guy, now I can see, and this lists them a little weird. First, it lists them all as stereo pairs if you want a stereo output, and then it lists them all as individual mono output. So for ease of just kind of readability here, let's look at the mono one. So it starts at analog 1, goes through analog 8. It's got my SPDIF, and then it's got ADAT 1, 2, and then ADAT 8. Okay, so that's great. So we can actually see all 16 inputs and 16 outputs in Reaper. I think that's pretty cool. Let's actually see if we can use them. See what happens here. I am going to grab a couple of cables here. Oh, I actually was a little prepared. Okay. So, since on the back of this, the only outputs for line outputs are XLR, and all of my outboard gear uses TRS, quarter-inch TRS. And I did try this last night, and it did actually work. So I've already ordered 8 of these cables in preparation for getting it all hooked up. But I only have one on hand right now, and so this is on one side XLR female, and on the other side it is a quarter-inch TRS. So I am going to, as a line output on channel number 1, I am gonna send this into my patch bay and into one of my compressors and see if we can get a signal out. All right, I think that will be good. Okay, let's see if I actually see activity on my compressor. Now we won't hear the kick drum because I don't have a return set up yet, so the signal is interrupted. So we won't actually hear anything. But let's just play and see. All right, cool. I am getting some LED activity on my compressor, which is great. I don't have the camera pointing to it, but let's take my word for it. Okay, so that's awesome. I do have output going from here. All right, that's good. So now let's see if I can return to that same channel and use an input as a hardware return. Let's see if now in RIA insert if we get a return volume. All right, let's hit play. Oh, there is a return volume. Okay, so I've loaded EZdrummer up here, and I have split all of the kit pieces out to their own tracks here. I've only just labeled the kick track here because that's really only the only thing we're going to really play with here. What I want to do is send a signal from my ADA8200 out to a compressor, and then also send a signal from my compressor back to the ADA8200. Now, anytime on a single track when I want to loop a piece of hardware in, what I do is I use RIA insert. So I'm going to click on the FX button here. We're going to look at VSTs, and I'm just going to type in the filter REAI. And there's RIA insert. Okay, I've got some funny business going on here with my routing because I'm actually using one of these hardware ins or outs. So I'm hearing an echo of my voice. So very quickly, I will select ADAT1 as my send, and I'm going to also select ADAT1 as my return. There we go. Okay, not hearing myself, and you don't see any activity in the meter here. Now I have ADAT1 sent to the input of my compressor, and I have the ADAT1 input connected to the out of my compressor. So let's take a look and see if we can get a signal through there. I'm just going to solo the kick and press play. Hey, all right. So I see a send volume and I see a return volume. And that's just using that ADA. So that means that it really does work. Let's make sure it's not just passing through here. I'm going to turn the volume all the way down on the compressor. And yeah, sure enough, goes away. That's freaking cool. Crank up the input. Really just crush it. Oh, that's terrific. That's good news. That's really good news. That's very exciting for me. Having 8 more, not only the 8 more inputs that I had planned to use, but also having 8 more outputs. That's really cool because I know in the future I'm going to be getting, I love hardware compressors. Software compressors, they are amazing. You can do all sorts of great stuff with them. Just me, it's a personal preference. I really love hardware compressors, and especially, just, good ones. I've got a few here. I have plans to get a few more, but having to juggle all these inputs and outputs because I only had so many on my interface, this is really exciting to me to have 8 more outputs. So Recording Studio 9, thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. This is really, really good news for me. Although it does mean I'm going to have to rethink some things in my patch bay or get another patch bay. Because mine is pretty much full the way I have it arranged right now, so I might have to do some economizing if I'm going to accommodate another 8 outputs. I just don't have 8 more vertical pairs, so I might have to fiddle around a little bit there. But thank you so much. I really do appreciate you bringing it to my attention, and I hope that this successfully illustrates how to hook up an ADAT to your audio interface. I mean, your audio interface has got to have ADAT connectivity in the first place. I know this, I try to keep this channel geared towards entry-level and beginners, and most beginners aren't really looking at interfaces that have ADAT connectivity, but there are a lot of drummers in the world. There are a lot of people looking to record full bands, live performance kinds of things. So hopefully this will be of some help to you guys, and hopefully you'll be as tickled as I am to have so much extra connectivity provided by just one more device. And a couple of more cables, and 8 more cables. All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate all you guys that are viewing, commenting, liking, subscribing, and everything. I really appreciate it. I will see you guys next time.